The Medal of Honor is the highest award the United States can bestow.
The President of the United States of America.
Authorized by Act of Congress.
On the 3rd of March, 1863.
Awards in the name of the Congress.
Medal of Honor.
The Medal of Honor.
The Medal of Honor.
Distinguished himself by conspicuous gallantry and indomitable courage.
For heroism above and beyond the call of duty.
America has not always awarded those deeds in combat, and doing so was a turning point in history. The Medal of Honor's origins are as rough and tumble as the nation that created it, a gamble that went strongly against the country's revolutionary roots.
The idea of a Medal of Honor in 1776 would have been something that would have been rejected by Americans because it would have been too British, it would have been too European, and it would have been too much like a monarchy led by a king. That was not the kind of American system they wanted to have. There were some steps in that direction with the certificates of merit during the Mexican War, but for the most part, they just rejected the idea of any sort of military service medal. That changes in the Civil War.
78 years after winning independence, the nation divides over constitutional issues. The Union and Confederate armies battle fiercely on land, while the navies begin their fight for the rivers and seaports that controlled the nation's economy. Losses and resignations plagued the Union. Commanding General Winfield Scott, a stalwart of tradition, struggles to rebuild the Army, yet refuses to compromise his stance and rejects all proposals for a military medal. Navy Secretary Gideon Welles, however, didn't answer to the Army. He saw a need to recognize courage and sacrifice in the ranks of enlisted Marines and sailors. The Confederates had no medals, and Welles believed a Union medal for valor would both separate and galvanize the Federal Navy. In the midst of salvaging what was left of the nation's armada, he asked Iowa Senator James Grimes to introduce a bill to create a Navy Medal for Valor.
We hereby approve the Secretary of the Navy to cause 200 Medals of Honor to be prepared and bestowed only upon such petty officers, seamen, landsmen, and Marines as shall most distinguish themselves by their gallantry in action during the present war.
By December of 1861, when the bill was presented, the Americans had been involved in the Civil War for 8 months and had been performing heroic actions, at sea and on land, but there had been no recognition of this. So the establishment of the Medal of Honor was something new. This was going to be a uniquely American award for acts of valor on the battlefield. After Senator Grimes introduced this bill, the Senate passed it, and President Lincoln signed it into law before the month ended.
The approval of the medal was a win for Navy Secretary Gideon Welles, but the design process was no easy task. He challenged Philadelphia Mint Director James Pollock to come up with a new medal. Pollock submitted several designs, but Welles refused them all. Finally, the small silversmithing firm William Wilson and Son, with the assistance of artist Christian Schussel, submitted a medal design that Gideon Welles instantly liked and approved for production. The original medal was a 5-point inverted bronze star, tipped with trefoils. Each arm of the star holds laurel and oak, representing victory and strength. In the center stands Minerva, the Roman goddess of war, personifying the United States. Her left hand rests on a phasis, a symbol of authority. Her right hand holds a shield bearing the nation's coat of arms. She repels a crouching figure holding snakes, symbolizing the enemy. 34 stars encircle the image, representing all states on both sides of the Civil War. The reverse side of the medal has the words, "Personal Valor," above a space where the recipient's name was inscribed. It hangs by a Navy anchor from a suspension ribbon with 13 alternating red and white stripes representing America's original colonies, immortalizing the nation's heritage in the medal.
The Navy saw value in the medal. The Army did not. The Army saw this as something that was alien to the American military culture. But 6 months later, the Army changed its mind and did accept the Medal of Honor.
That change was brought about by the resignation of primary opponent General Winfield Scott. The door was now open for the Army to pursue a medal of their own, helped through Congress by Massachusetts Senator Henry Wilson.
Wilson has been watching what Grimes is doing with the Naval Medal of Honor, working with Gideon Welles. Wilson in 1862 introduces a similar resolution to provide a Medal of Honor to those serving with distinction in the Army.
Resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives that the President of the United States cause 2,000 Medals of Honor to be prepared and presented in the name of Congress to non-commissioned officers and privates who distinguish themselves by their gallantry in action and other soldier-like qualities.
July 12, 1862. President Lincoln signed the bill, and the Army had approval to create its own version of the medal. Mint Director James Pollock immediately proposes to Secretary of War Edwin Stanton a plan to use the Navy medal with a few modifications. Stanton initially refuses, but is eventually swayed by William Wilson, who convinced him it would be less trouble to simply rework the Navy design. The Philadelphia Mint made the modifications that set it apart from the Navy's. Instead of an anchor attaching the medal to the suspension ribbon, an eagle was substituted, perched atop crossed cannons, clutching a saber in its talons. On the back, the Army changed the words from personal valor to the Congress to, with the same space for the recipient's name. After 2 years of debate, legislation, and design, the Army and Navy each had a Medal for Valor in their respective systems, but the initial awarding of the decoration goes to an unexpected group. In March of 1862, a company of Union soldiers led by civilian James Andrews stole a train in northern Georgia and raced toward Chattanooga in an effort to disrupt Confederate supply lines. They destroyed track and telegraph lines along the way in what became known as the Great Locomotive Chase. Many of the raiders were captured and hanged. The survivors met Andrew Johnson, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, and U.S. Treasurer Salmon Chase a year later in Washington. Stanton presented Private Jacob Parrott and 6 others with the new Army Medal of Honor, then ushered the men across the street so President Lincoln could meet them. The actions under fire by Captain of the Maintop John Williams of the USS Pawnee in the Battle of Matthias Point, Virginia, merited the first Navy Medal of Honor. He received it 10 years later. But the first Navy award Stanton presented went to Seaman Robert Williams for actions aboard the USS Commodore Perry in an attack upon Franklin, Virginia. During a retreat under heavy fire from the Confederates, it ran aground. As other sailors were ordered to take cover, he remained at his post to help the vessel break free, ensuring the safety of his crewmates. He was one of 40 Navy sailors to receive the medal that day for their bravery. Corporal John Mackey would become the first Marine to receive the nation's highest award in July 1863 for his actions aboard the USS Galena in the attack on Fort Darling. Heavy fire had killed the sailors manning the vital deck guns. Mackey took charge in the battle, leading a group of Marines to their former position and taking over the guns to return fire. A total of 680 medals were awarded during the Civil War, a number that would climb to over 1,500 for the conflict alone in the years following. The Confederate surrender at Appomattox in April 1865 closed an ugly chapter in American history, and many believed the Medal of Honor would end with the war.
It transferred to other military actions. It transferred to the Indian Wars. It transferred to any sort of military service. And it wasn't necessarily designed to fit these other national emergencies.
The Navy's Korean expedition of 1871 marked the first time the medal was awarded for combat actions against a foreign enemy. A fleet of 5 battleships searched for survivors of a merchant marine ship destroyed by the Koreans. The Americans hoped to establish diplomatic relations, but the efforts were misinterpreted. A battle followed, where 9 sailors and 6 Marines were awarded for their actions under fire. Across the plains of North America, a new push in westward settlement increased the friction between the Army and Indian tribes, particularly in the Black Hills, which the government had given to the Sioux in 1868. That treaty was violated when gold was discovered and miners moved in to stake their claims. Dakota Commander Alfred Terry tried to purchase the land from the Lakota. When they refused to sell, he sent in the army. What followed led to one of the biggest Indian battles in United States history.
The Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876, the Army suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of the Lakota and the Northern Cheyenne. The 7th Cavalry, which was one of the premier units of the United States Army, was virtually annihilated. It was a great humiliation for the Army. But many acts of valor were performed on that day by the survivors of the 7th Cavalry. And at the end of the battle, the surviving officers submitted many of these soldiers for Valor Awards, the Medal of Honor. When General Terry received these recommendations, he was appalled by the number. He thought that many of these soldiers, while certainly they had performed with great valor, they had only performed with the valor that was usually expected of an American soldier under fire. He thought that many of these were not necessarily deserving of special recognition. But in order to be fair, he convened a board, which consisted of Colonel Sturgis, who was the commander of the 7th Cavalry, and a number of other officers. And the purpose of this board was to review all of the recommendations and choose the ones that were truly deserving of recognition for the Medal of Honor.
General Terry's measures in the wake of Little Bighorn to reduce the number of soldiers nominated set new standards for the award. It established the principal rule of thumb for the Medal of Honor. A soldier could not be nominated for simply doing his duty. His actions had to be voluntarily above and beyond the orders given. The rule immediately became a part of Army regulations governing the award and disqualified dozens of applicants. As a result, 24 men received the medal for actions at Little Bighorn. They became part of the more than 400 awarded during the Indian Campaign era, including one presented retroactively to Assistant Surgeon Bernard Irwin for leading an incredible rescue mission that freed 60 soldiers from the Apaches in 1861. His actions occurred before the medal existed, so he is considered the first chronological recipient.
By the time you get to the late 19th and early 20th century, to the presidency of William McKinley, for instance, it has gone through several administrations, and it has gone through an evolutionary change that brings its merits into question. People begin to wonder if the people being given the Medal of Honor are truly deserving of the Medal of Honor. Have they really done individual acts of courage and valor that would warrant the giving of the Medal of Honor?
President William McKinley acknowledges the flaws in the Medal of Honor system and directs Secretary of War Russell Alger to issue a general order to clean up the decoration. The biggest problem was veterans were able to nominate themselves, which created more pending applications for the award than those actually given during the Civil War. The order ended self-nominations and required testimony under oath from eyewitnesses to the act. But it maintained that the award would be given for gallantry and intrepidity, above and beyond that of one's fellow soldier. McKinley's order went into effect prior to the Spanish-American War in 1898, Boxer Rebellion in 1900, and ongoing campaigns in the Philippines. More than 250 medals were awarded for these conflicts for courage under fire. The assassination of President McKinley didn't stop his administration's efforts to clean up the medal. President Theodore Roosevelt shared McKinley's desire to elevate the decoration. His Secretary of War, Elihu Root, established a review board to handle the backlog of nominations. The board's success, under the direction of medal recipient General Arthur MacArthur, led Root to make that review board a permanent fixture in the Army's Medal of Honor process. The Army wasn't the only group trying to clean up the decoration. The rise of civilian fraud and military imposters caused past recipients to form the Medal of Honor Legion. They lobbied to protect the medal's integrity and pushed for an official list of recipients. Their efforts persuaded the Army to get Congress to approve a number of changes for the award. This included a neck ribbon and rosette to be worn on civilian clothes. They also altered the suspension ribbon from a blue field with red and white stripes to red, white, and blue vertical stripes.
The Army began to review the entire process of awarding the Medal of Honor, and one of the things they discovered was there were a lot of knockoffs of the medal being made and sold across the nation.
So the Grand Army of the Republic was a fraternal organization. It was organized in 1866. And any member, former veteran of the Union Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Revenue Service, was eligible, and every member was given a Grand Army of the Republic badge. And this badge looked very similar to the Medal of Honor. It's the shape of the badge, the color scheme of the ribbon with the red, white, and blue looked almost exact. It was very difficult to tell the difference between this Grand Army of the Republic badge and the actual Medal of Honor.
The Army solicited a number of redesigns, and a winning design was submitted by a General George Gillespie from Kingston, Tennessee. This is the design that we know today.
The new Army medal kept the inverted star but modified the face. The image of Minerva repelling discord was replaced with a simple profile of the helmeted goddess. The ring of 34 stars was dropped in favor of the text, "The United States of America," with a small crest below. Oak clusters remained in the arms of the star, while the laurel became a wreath, both enameled in dark green. The eagle atop cannons was exchanged for a Valor bar with an adaptation of the American seal of an eagle clutching arrows and an olive branch. The red, white, and blue ribbon was done away with, and a light blue ribbon with 13 stars representing the original colonies used instead. On the reverse, the words, "The Congress To," were moved to the Valor bar, and the entire back face left blank for the name of the recipient. General George Gillespie, who was also a medal recipient, patented the reworked Army decoration and transferred the patent to the War Department, making it illegal to duplicate. Congress required all medals be exchanged for the new one. After recipients expressed sentimental attachment to their presented medal, Congress reversed the decision, but made it illegal to wear both out of respect for the men who had been awarded 2 medals. The Army redesign showed the medal was evolving. The stronger criteria and review board seemed successful, But President Theodore Roosevelt disapproved of the military's unceremonious delivery. Since its creation, the medal had been casually delivered to soldiers and sailors. They were handed out in the field, left on bunks, even sent in the mail, methods that didn't match the elevated place the medal was starting to hold with the American people. Roosevelt issued an executive order stating the presentation had to be made by the president or a representative he designates with formal and impressive ceremony.
Well, you have Teddy Roosevelt as a person who's very much into the whole concept of personal valor, individual action, and the value of great soldiers and great naval officers.
And he wanted to make a big deal out of this because he thought we should. Thought that soldiers who were recognized for great acts of valor and service to the Republic deserved to be recognized by the Republic.
The first official recipient to be presented the medal at the White House was Army Surgeon James Church for bravely carrying wounded men to safety during the Spanish-American War. A joint Armed Forces Board met in 1913 to standardize campaign decorations, and the Navy decided it would adopt the Gillespie ribbon for their Medal of Honor. 2 years later, they obtained approval from Congress to lift the 54-year ban and allow naval officers to receive the decoration. While the Navy had carefully managed their Medal of Honor, this was not always the case with the Army. So Congress took action that would change the Medal of Honor process forever.
In 1916, Congress passes a National Defense Legislation Act that creates, among other things, a $10 pension for the past recipients of the award. And they do this partly to satisfy the recipients themselves, because it's a way of legitimizing those who have received the award in the past. Congress does this, but it also does it in a way that it gets itself more involved, because now it has to appropriate funds for this process.
The $10 a month pension created an annual six-figure budget that required congressional oversight and gave the Medal of Honor Legion the roll of honor they had been seeking. Before the roll could be assembled, Congress ordered the War Department to review all Army Medal of Honor citations ever issued to ensure all medals and forthcoming pensions were justified. General Nelson Miles chaired a board with General Samuel Young, General Joseph Sanger, General Butler Price, and Major General Oswald Ernst. Together, they were charged with reviewing the citations and revoking those that were disqualified.
They had a couple of criteria. One, anyone on that roll had to have served in the American military, either as an enlisted man or as an officer. And two, they would have had to have received the medal for an act of valor on the battlefield, actually in conflict with an enemy. This created some problems because prior to this was not the criteria for the award. You could receive it as a civilian, you could receive it for great service. So this meant that many people who would receive the medal were going to be stripped of it. To create a blind process, General Miles stripped the names from the citations and replaced them with numbers. Then he and the board went through the citations using the criteria that Congress gave them to decide who was truly deserving of the medal. At the end of this process, which became known as the Purge of 1917, 911 recipients were stripped of their Medal of Honor.
The board revoked 864 medals awarded to the 27th Maine for re-enlisting, 29 from Lincoln's Funeral Guard, 12 from unqualified recipients, 5 from the Indian campaigns given to civilian scouts, including Buffalo Bill Cody, and 1 issued to Mary Edwards Walker, who was presented the medal in lieu of an officer's commission.
A very traumatic event for many people, but it codified, finally, the actual criteria and standards for the Medal of Honor that we have today. It has to be a serving member of the United States military, and the award is given for the highest acts of valor in armed conflict with an enemy of the Republic.
The Army Board's decision came as the nation was entering World War I. America joined its European allies in the fight against the Central Powers. The nation's concept of battlefield valor would be tested when the U.S. military stepped onto the world stage for the first time. They faced combat in air, on land, and at sea. 124 fighter pilots, sailors, soldiers, and Marines would be awarded the Medal of Honor. There were other acts of heroism among the 600,000 troops serving in Europe that didn't meet those high standards. But Commanding General John Pershing felt they were still worthy of recognition.
For almost 50 years, the Medal of Honor remained the only decoration to recognize valor and heroic performance. It wasn't until the First World War where we saw an expansion of the military award system. The Army created the Army Distinguished Service Cross and the Army Distinguished Service Medal, and the Navy created the Navy Cross and the Navy Distinguished Service Medal. As we progressed through the 20th century, we saw the creation of other awards to include the Silver Star and the Bronze Star.
The Medal of Honor became the de facto father of all military decorations. President Woodrow Wilson ordered the creation of an Army department to oversee these new medals. It would become the Institute of Heraldry.
We have all these other means of recognizing performance on the battlefield. The Medal of Honor throughout time has then even held a greater distinction as the highest level and the highest form of achievement on the battlefield.
Alvin York shouldered that distinction and would become the most famous American soldier to emerge from the trenches of World War I. The Tennessee draftee assumed command of his small unit after the officers were killed and led the capture of 132 German soldiers with little aid. The story of those actions and his life in the hills before the war was published in a 1919 Saturday Evening Post, capturing the attention of the nation. The magazine's circulation of over 2 million put a real face on the Medal of Honor for the American people. In the wake of World War I, the Navy adopted some of the decisions made by the 1917 Army Board. They ended double awards of the decoration and mandated that recipients had to be uniformed members of the Navy. Ships and submarines still presented inherent dangers not known to land forces, so the Navy retained their right to award for non-combat actions, but decided to create a new Medal of Honor specifically for combat.
Many of the non-combat awards for the Navy were for saving a drowning sailor or for responding to a fire on board the ship, something that every sailor and every officer understands the risk that's involved in that. The Navy wanted to maintain the original Medal of Honor for non-combat acts of heroics, but also wanted to create a new medal for combat actions.
Secretary of the Navy Josephus Daniels looked at several designs of the new combat medal and rejected most as being too gaudy or un-American. He wanted it to look like a Navy medal and insisted upon anchors in the design. Frustration finally led Daniels to sending out requests to various jewelers to submit designs, and he ended up selecting a cross-style Medal of Honor from Tiffany & Company of New York. New York's Tiffany & Company had been one of the nation's leading design houses since its founding in 1837. They had been called on before by the government to craft presentation swords and even redesign the U.S. seal for the 1885 $1 bill. But this was their first foray into medal making. In the center of the cross is the Great Seal, surrounded by an octagon bearing the words United States Navy, and the dates 1917 to 1918, representing World War I. Each arm of the cross holds an anchor, and a wreath of oak and laurel lies behind. It hangs from the same light blue ribbon with 13 white stars used on the other medals. The Tiffany Cross was improperly awarded almost from the start.
So while the Tiffany Cross was designed to be awarded for combat actions only, there were several high-profile exceptions. The most famous of those were Commander Byrd and Floyd Bennett, his pilot, for their non-combat flight over the North Pole. They were given the new Tiffany Cross. They should have gotten the original award. So that led to unhappiness, to confusion of the new criteria, and ultimately the new Tiffany Cross by the early 1940s would go away.
The short-lived, unpopular design saw only 25 of them awarded from its creation in 1919 until its elimination in 1942. Congress also became more involved in the process when it extended the Gillespie patent in 1923 and made it illegal to counterfeit military decorations. The stock market crash of 1929 led to a series of economic collapses in Asia and Europe that would once again bring America to the brink of war. The rise of Adolf Hitler and the Axis powers in the 1930s played out on radio across the country. The bombing of Pearl Harbor enraged the nation. Patriotic fervor was stirred even more by the release of the 1941 film Sergeant York. It became one of the highest-grossing films in history and reintroduced Alvin York to an entirely new generation. The Tennesseans' World War I exploits inspired thousands of men to leave the theater and enlist. World War II battles would wage around the globe, seeing more Medal of Honor recipients pushed into the national limelight. Many became household names, like Pappy Boyington, Jimmy Doolittle, Commando Kelly, and Audie Murphy. 464 total Medals of Honor were awarded to American fighters in World War II, the most from a single conflict since the Civil War. One of these went to Coast Guard signalman Douglas Monroe, who posthumously received the Navy Medal for sacrificing his life while leading the evacuation of a battalion of Marines at the Battle of Guadalcanal. He is the first and only Coast Guard member to be awarded the nation's highest decoration. It was during the war that the modern neck ribbon that we know today was adopted. Instead of hanging directly from the ribbon, the medal now hangs from an octagonal pad featuring 13 stars and a chevron, still boldly representing the original colonies. World War II had seen the Army grow from 189,000 soldiers in 1939 to more than 8 million by the war's end. The war had completely changed the military. As the mass of servicemen and women returned home to their loved ones and victory celebrations, the nation reorganized its forces, consolidating its command structures under one roof at the new Pentagon. The biggest change was made to the U.S. Army Air Corps. It had tripled in size since 1941, and the Corps' stunning successes over Asia and Europe proved it was no longer a supporting player to the Army, but a force unto itself, a message its highly decorated airmen had been trying to convey for more than 25 years.
One of the things that airmen have struggled with, quite honestly, since the First World War, was legitimizing the role of air power in warfare and legitimizing the air service.
The Army Air Corps finally won that long-fought battle with the passage of the 1947 National Security Act. It created the United States Air Force, marking the first time a service branch had been established since the nation's founding. The Korean War was the introductory conflict for the newly founded Air Force. More than 130 medals were awarded for the conflict, 4 of those to Air Force pilots. But because there was no Air Force Medal of Honor, they received the Army version.
It only made sense, since the Air Force was in fact a separate service, to be able to recognize airmen with an Air Force Medal of Honor. It simply took a number of years for Congress to act and to bring that to fruition.
In 1956, Congress authorized an Air Force version of the award. It took 9 years for it to become a reality. It uses the same 5-point inverted star, as well as oak and laurel clusters on a green enamel background and an enameled laurel wreath at the perimeter. 34 stars encircle an image of Liberty, who has replaced Minerva. The medallion hangs from an interpretation of the Air Force coat of arms, featuring an eagle's wings and talons atop thunderbolts, all below a Valor Bar. The back is left blank for the recipient's name. The very first Air Force medal is presented to Major Bernard Fisher for landing his plane on a busted runway under fire to rescue a downed pilot during the Vietnam War. The United States Air Force would earn the majority of its medals during the decade-long conflict that claimed more than 58,000 American lives. The jungles, rivers, and coastal plains of the Southeast Asian country would test all branches of the military. The battlefield engagements with the North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong guerrillas led to more than 240 Medals of Honor being awarded for individual gallantry across all branches of America's armed forces. The era of peace following Vietnam gave the nation time to reflect upon the Medal of Honor. It was historically awarded for individual battlefield achievement, transcending the color, creed, and citizenship of the recipient. Investigations into the world wars proved otherwise. Congress ordered a review of past recommendations, and the Army found there had been oversights. The result was 30 Medals of Honor being awarded to minority recipients or their descendants from both world wars. This was not the only time actions had been reviewed. The Secretary of the Army restored Mary Walker's medal in 1977, reinstituting her as the only female recipient. The medals taken from the civilian scouts in the Indian campaigns, including Buffalo Bill Cody's, were also restored 12 years later. 2001 marked a unique moment when Theodore Roosevelt received the Medal of Honor for his actions during the Spanish-American War. When it was presented to his great-grandson, he became the only president to ever be awarded the decoration. His son, Theodore Roosevelt Jr., received it during World War II. They became the second pair of father-son recipients after Arthur and Douglas MacArthur, who received medals during the Civil War and World War II Philippines campaign, respectively. The designs have evolved over the years, but the craftsmanship for creating a Medal of Honor hasn't changed since the Philadelphia Mint struck the first one. It's more than punching out a coin and clipping it to a piece of cloth. The Department of Defense and Institute of Heraldry require the utmost precision from all manufacturers.
We have a very stringent process. One of the things we look for in our certification program is that the manufacturing base and everything that they make is here in the United States. When you're looking at a Medal of Honor, there's several specifications that go into that. There's a specification just for the metal part of it. There's a specification for the ribbon part of it. And there's a specification for the case.
These safeguards were put in place to protect the decoration after a 1996 incident uncovered one of the biggest frauds in the medal's history. The Federal Bureau of Investigation caught a government contractor selling unauthorized Medals of Honor to the general public. This led the Institute of Heraldry to further tighten the manufacturing process.
When you're awarded the Medal of Honor contract, it's really a significant situation. We contact the Institute of Heraldry. They will release to us dies specifically for striking that piece. They need to be returned in a very timely manner. We are not allowed to keep a set of dies actually here in case we have a contract come up in the future, so there's no duplicates made. They measure out exactly the amount of ribbon that is needed to create the ribbon drape for the medal. It's a very, very tightly controlled situation. It's not something that's done as mass-produced. We get the order and we do one piece at a time specifically for that particular individual.
The living recipients of the award have always been its greatest protectors against fraud. They first organized as the Congressional Medal of Honor Society after World War II and were officially chartered by that legislative body in 1958. They have since witnessed the creation of the Air Force Medal and the addition of a special flag that now accompanies the award.
Congress legislated in 2004 the creation of the Medal of Honor flag as a distinguishing device to recognize the individuals that have received the Medal of Honor. You'll appreciate the bold simplicity of its colors and its design, which is really taken from the neck ribbon of the Medal of Honor.
The most important element of the Medal of Honor is the selection of its candidates. The process of deciding who receives the award requires the strictest procedures and protocols.
The one aspect that does differentiate the Medal of Honor from all other awards is that there is an explicit standard of proof for evidence that's expressed in regulations. There can be no margin of doubt. On the battlefield, if a sailor or Marine commits an act that is conspicuously heroic, that's the genesis of a recommendation. Someone is going to come forward and explain what occurred. The commanding officer would usually conduct a fact-finding investigation to gather evidence, take statements from everyone who was there, and then present that as an investigation report along with the nomination for the medal. There's a very careful examination of this evidence by every level of command. And then if the Secretary of Defense approves the award, he will forward it to the President for the final decision. The individual recipient is not aware that he has been nominated for the Medal of Honor, and we do not make that public to the press. We don't make any announcements or answer any questions about a specific nomination prior to its final decision.
The actions that led to this decision are chronicled in a citation. This is the official record that accompanies every medal. It bears the Medal of Honor trademark, the recipient's name, the details, location, and the date it took place. The document bears the signature of the President and is ceremoniously read before the medal is presented to the recipient or a family member.
The citations are almost as important as the awards themselves, and the details in the citations have changed dramatically over time. The early citations in the Civil War, very simple. Service member's name, his rank, what ship he was on, the dates the event took place, and maybe just a few facts and figures, but that is it. Today, the citations are much more elaborate, and it's much more dramatic the way they're presented now.
Citations are a part of history. They recount the heroic actions of the individual. We take great care not only to make sure that those citations are completely factual, but also that they're inspirational, that they tell a story that makes everyone who reads it proud of their country, but also to create a sense of awe of the bravery of the individual that earned this medal. One of the most common misperceptions about the current Medal of Honor process is that an individual would have to die or be grievously wounded in action in order to receive the Medal of Honor. And that is not true. It is not part of any criteria, it's not in the law, and it's not in any regulations. The fact that many have perished in the process of committing their heroic actions speaks to the fact that they obviously risked their lives above and beyond the call of duty.
Those men are the silent guard, maintaining the Medal of Honor's credibility. There have been more than 600 posthumous recipients of the award. Airmen, Marines, sailors, and soldiers who paid the ultimate price in the face of the enemy. their echoing last acts inspiring victory from the jaws of defeat. 4 posthumous recipients have been visited by millions at one of the nation's most reverent landmarks. The tomb of the unknown soldier contains the remains of service members whose bodies were never identified from foreign battlefields. President Warren G. Harding presented the first casualty interred there a Medal of Honor on November 11, 1921. 3 more medals have been presented to unknown soldiers over the years, representing World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. The Sentinels of the 3rd Infantry Regiment's Old Guard remain on constant watch. Every hour of every day. The monument overlooks more than 300 other Medal of Honor recipients laid to rest in the sacred grounds of Arlington National Cemetery. The Medal of Honor represents the best of the American warrior tradition. It has been draped around the necks of people from all walks of life. Their commitment and integrity has made it an unwavering symbol of perseverance and survival, exemplifying patriotism, courage, honor, and sacrifice. The rarely awarded medal speaks to the high standards of battlefield valor in the armed forces. Its presentation to an airman, Marine, sailor, or soldier is cause to take notice and remember what the word hero really means.